Chapter 14, and Discoveries, pages 67 to 76, 102 to 120, 135 to 161, 228 to 233, 337 to 347, 438 to 463, 582 to 588, and 645 to 652. Layered attempts to give a general idea of the palace and of its decorations. There is also much detailed information regarding this building in Rawlinson's 5 Great Monarchies, Volume 2. Pages 178 to 133. The only details that have been given, so far as we know, of the discovery and exhumation of Assurbanipal's palace, are to be found in an article by Mr. Rassam entitled, Excavations and Discoveries in Assyria, Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology, Volume 7. Pages 37 to 58. This paper contains a plan of the Northern Palace, page 40. Erbil is the site of the Assyrian city of Arbela, and in the plains outside it was fought the great battle between Alexander and Darius. I had no time to examine the place, but I saw in passing that there were mounds rivaling in size those of the Assyrian capital. Over the principal mound a Turkish fortress is built, which would make it difficult to excavate here. But as Arbela was a great city, much may be expected here whenever it is explored. George Smith, Assyrian Discoveries. See the article by Mr. Rassam quoted on the last page. The plan, page 52, he gives does not tell us much. See Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 45 to 63, and Discoveries. See Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. It is in chapters 11 to 14 of his second work, Discoveries, and that Layered tells the story of his discoveries in that valley of the Chaboras from which the writings of Ezekiel were dated. See page 145. We have noticed at pages 176 and 177 of our first volume the 2 passages in which Strabo discusses the houses of Susiana and Chaldea. As to the villages in the Euphrates Valley, in which domes are still used, see Oppert, Expedition Scientifique, Volume 1. Herodotus, I. 180. Diodorus, 2. 8, 4, 5. G. Smith, Assyrian Discoveries, pp. 55, 56. M. Oppert also admits that this is the only city that has left traces that cannot easily be mistaken. Expedition Scientifique, Volume 1, pages 194, 195. Herodotus, I. 178. Diodorus, 2. 7, 3. The following passage has been quoted from Aristotle's Politics, 3. 1. As supporting the assertion of Diodorus, it is obvious that a town is not made by a wall. One might, if that were so, make the Peloponnesus into a town, Babylon, perhaps, and some other towns belong to this class, their enceinte enclosing towns rather than cities. The text of Aristotle seems to me to prove nothing more than that the philosopher was acquainted with the descriptions of Diodorus and Ctesias. He says nothing as to their exactness. He merely borrows an illustration from them, by which he attempts to make his thought more clear, and to explain the difference between a real city with an organic life of its own, and a mere space surrounded by walls, in which men might live in close neighborhood with each other, but with nothing that could be called civic life. All the texts relating to the ancient boundaries of Babylon will be found united in M. Oppert's examination of this question. Even now the wall of the royal city stands up more than 30 feet above the level of the plain. Herodotus says nothing of the tunnel, Diodorus alone mentions it, 2. 9, 2. See Oppert on this subject. He believes in its existence, Expedition Scientifique, Volume 1. Herodotus, I. 186, Diodorus, 2. 8, 2. Diodorus, following Ctesias, greatly exaggerates the length of the bridge when he puts it at 55 stades, 3,032 feet. Even if we admit that the Euphrates, which in ancient times lost less of its waters in the adjoining marshes than it does now, was then considerably wider than at present, we can hardly account for such a difference. On the subject of this bridge see Oppert, Expedition and Volume 1, pages 191 to 193. Layard, Discoveries. See Oppert, Expedition and Volume 1, pages 184, 185. Herodotus mentions these keys, too. 180, 186. Diodorus, 2. 8. 3, gives them a length of 160 stades, nearly 18.5 miles, which seems a great exaggeration. Herodotus, I. 180. And this makes us think that the streets were narrow, a conjecture confirmed by the words of Herodotus. In speaking of the doors above mentioned by which the river was reached, he does not use the word pi lambda alpha iota, but pi upsilon lambda delta epsilon, its diminutive. If these doors were so small, the streets must have been lanes. This we gather from more than one phrase of the historian, 2. 183 and 196. Diodorus, 2. 8, 3. All that he says is that it was on the Tigris, I. 193, that it had a king called Sardanapalus, 2. 150, and that it was taken by the Medes, I. 103, 106. Anabasis, 3. 4. Diodorus, 2. 3, 2, 3. Line 35 of the Cylinder of Bellino, after Pongnon, L'inscription de Bavian. In the Bibliothèque de l'École de Hautes Études. M. Oppert also considers the evidence of Ctesias as worthless, Expedition Scientifique, Volume 1. Sir Henry Layard on the other hand believes in the great Nineveh of that writer, Nineveh, Volume 2. He is chiefly influenced by the often quoted verses of the Book of Jonah, in which it is declared, now Nineveh was an exceeding great city of 3 days' journey. And that there were in it more than 60,000 persons that cannot discern between their right hand and their left hand, which, with the ordinary proportion of children to adults, would give a total population of about 800,000. We shall not waste time in explaining that all these expressions are but poetic ways of saying that Nineveh was a great city. It is a singular idea to look for topographical and statistical information in a book which makes a prophet sail from Joppa for Spain and, immediately afterwards, without any preparation, speaks of him as preaching in the streets of Nineveh. Add to this that, according to the most recent criticism, the Book of Jonah is not older than the 6th century before our era, so that it must have been written long after the fall of Nineveh. And when its power was no more than a memory, see Noldic, Histoire littéraire de l'Ancien Testament. In Sir H. Layard's latest published remarks on the extent of Nineveh, he rejects the statements of Diodorus for much the same reasons as those given by M. Perrot, article on Nineveh in Smith's Dictionary of the Bible, 1863 edition. Ed. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Volume 5. Oppert, Expedition, Volume 1. Layard, Volume 2. The English explorers have found traces of some external works and of a ditch which is now filled with the waters of the Causer. Rawlinson, The 5 Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 259 to 261. Layard, Discoveries, pages 120 to 122. It has no scale. Herodotus, I. 178. Herodotus, I. 179. Herodotus says that the Chaldeans constructed buildings of a single chamber along each parapet of the wall, leaving room between them for a 4-horse chariot to turn. His words are, pi nu omega delta tau omicron tau epsilon chi epsilon omicron pi alpha rho tau sigma chi alpha tau alpha, omicron kappa mu omicron upsilon nu kappa omega lambda alpha delta epsilon iota mu alpha nu, tau epsilon tau rho alpha mu nu alpha lambda eta lambda alpha. Tau mu sigma omicron nu delta tau nu omicron kappa eta mu tau omega nu lambda iota pi omicron nu tau epsilon theta rho pi epsilon rho iota lambda alpha sigma iota nu. Ed. Diodorus, 2. 7, 4. In many carved pictures of sieges we see soldiers who appear to be digging mines. Layard, Monuments, Series I, Plates 19, 20, 66. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. Place, Nineveh, Volume 1. Volume 2. Place, Nineveh, Volume I, pages 197 to 198. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1. See Volume 1, page 242, and Figure 97. All these details are taken from Place, Nineveh, Volume 1, pages 169 to 182. Genesis 19. 1. Genesis 23. 10. Ruth 4. 1 and 2. See also 2 Kings 7. 1. Ed. Esther 2. 21. Esther 3. 2, 3, 4. 2, 6. At Semel, to the north of Mosul, Layard saw the Yezidi chief, Abd-Agha, seated in the gate, a vaulted entrance with deep recesses on both sides, used as places of assembly for business during the day, and as places of rest for guests during the night. Discoveries. Place, Nineveh, Volume 1. It is even believed that the Assyrians used a machine for launching great stones, like the Roman catapult. The representations in the bas-reliefs are not, however, very clear. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. Place, Nineveh, Volume 1. Causeways of this kind may be noticed stretching away from the tower in our Figure 29. See also Layard, Monuments, 2nd Series, Plates 18 and 21. A few terracotta statuettes have certainly been found, but these seem to be idols rather than images of the defunct. The ordinary and principal office of the human-headed bull was to guard the doors of temples and palaces, but in his role of protecting genius, other functions were included. Thus, in a bas-relief representing Sargon's campaigns in Phoenicia, we find a bull that seems to be walking on the sea. With Anan, Oans, or Dagon, the fish god, he presides over the journeys of the ships that bring cargoes of wood from Lebanon, Bada, Monument to Nineveh, Plate 32. M. Lenormand has collected these texts in his Origines de l'Histoire, Volume 1. This must represent one of the favorite rites of the Chaldeo-Assyrian religion. Allusion to it is made in the passage given as a letter of Jeremiah, Baruch 6. 25. Now shall ye see in Babylon gods of silver, and of gold, and of wood, borne upon shoulders, which cause the nations to fear. Shibboleth, Catalogue Général de Cames de la Bibliothèque Nationale, No. 754, proposes to recognize in the scene here represented the offering of his nightly spouse to Bel in his temple at Babylon, Herodotus, I. 181. M. Lenormand agrees with this interpretation, Essai de commentaire de fragments de Burroughs. Menant, on the other hand, thinks it as little justified as that which finds the early scenes of Genesis, the temptation of Eve, and the eating of the forbidden fruit, reproduced upon the cylinders, remarks sur un cylindre du musée britannique. In the Comptes Rendus de l'Académie des Inscriptions, 1879, pp. 270 to 286. In the great stone torso of which we shall speak presently, page 98, these details seem to have been omitted, at least no trace of them is to be found on the stone, but they may have been added in paint. In figures of men the Assyrians very rarely indicated the male organs. One of the personages sculptured on the Balawat gates affords an exception to this general practice, but he is a prisoner about to be put to death. And the detail in question is a kind of indignity meant by the sculptor to show that the man in question was a savage who fought in puris naturalibus. Among the Lydians, says Herodotus, in his account of the adventure of Gyges, I. 10, as among nearly all barbarous nations, it was a great indignity, even for a man, to be seen naked. Conf. Plato, Republic, 452, c. Thucydides, I. 6. Xenophon, Hellenica, 3. 4, 19. Herodotus, I. 195, as for their dress they wore a linen tunic coming down to their feet, and, over that, a woolen tunic. Finally they wrapped themselves in a short white cloak. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Figure 98. Husav, Les Feuilles de Chaldée. See Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Figure 255, Volume 2. Figures 247 and 259 and Ibid, Volume 2. Plate Facing. And Figures 268 and 269. See Layered, Monuments, First Series, Plates 15 and 16. In one relief the figures of these swimmers are no more than 14 inches long, British Museum, Assyrian Basement Room, number 56. Layered, Monuments, First Series, Plate 57. Second Series, Plates 25 and 28. Ibid, First Series, Plate 63, Discoveries. We have refrained from giving a reproduction of this fragment on account of its bad condition. Its surface is rough. It lacks the head, the forearms, and the foreparts of the feet. The material is a coarse limestone. The height of the fragment is 38 inches. No people that have ever lived have been more solicitous than the Assyrians to transmit the remembrance of their exploits to posterity. We thus find that many of their sculptured slabs had their posterior faces, those that were turned to the wall, also covered with inscriptions. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. British Museum. The whole series is illustrated in Layered, Monuments, Second Series, Plates 20 to 24. Sir H. Layard's translation is different, Discoveries. That quoted in the text has been kindly furnished to us by M. Oppert. Sir H. Layard, who has seen more Assyrian sculptures in place than anyone else, seems to have been much struck by these incongruities. It is rare, he says, to find an entire, Assyrian, bas-relief equally well executed in all its parts. Nineveh, Volume 2. This impression is still more strongly felt on glancing through the plates in which Sir H. Layard has reproduced in their entirety the series of sculptures which we can only show in fragmentary fashion. Compare, for example, the Panathenaic cortege with two processions taken from the palace of Sennacherib, the grooms leading horses, and servants carrying fruits and other comestibles, Monuments, Second Series, Plates 7 to 9. And the triumphal march of the Assyrian army with its chariots, IB. Plates 47 to 49. Layered, Monuments, Second Series, Plates 45 and 46. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 302 to 314. At Nimrud, in the palace of Esarhaddon, the lions and bulls of the gateways are of a grey and rather coarse limestone, while the bas-reliefs are of alabaster. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 26 and 163. The same mixture occurs in the palace of Asurnazirpal. Several of the bulls in that building are of a fine yellow limestone which must have been brought from the hills of Kurdistan. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Discoveries, pages 307, 308, 309, and each side of the original has 5 reliefs. We have been compelled to suppress one in order to give our figures sufficient scale. The obelisk reliefs should be studied in horizontal bands, and not by taking the whole of a face at a time. A translation of the accompanying texts will be found in Oppert's Expedition, Volume 1. And reproductions of all the 4 faces in Layard's Monuments, First Series, Plates 53 to 56. Place, Nineveh, Volume 1. And Volume 3. Plate 48, Figure 3. Hussey, Catalogue de figurines en terre quite du Musée du Louvre, Volume 1. Hussey, Catalogue, and Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 375. Both the British Museum and the Louvre possess examples of this kind of work in which the handling shows the greatest freedom. The slab numbered 107 contains, perhaps, the nearest approach to a reproduction of the group in question. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 197 to 203, and figures 179 and 180. This was the opinion of M. de Longperrier, Musée Napoleon III. Description of Plate 1. See Volume 1, page 242. See also Plate 12. Layered discoveries. De Longperrier, Notice de Antiquités Assyriens du Musée du Louvre, 3rd edition, 1854. We take this transcription from a note sent by Dr. Birch to the Athenaeum, July 14, 1877, when the ivory in question, together with many more objects, was stolen from the British Museum. It was offered by the thief, in the first place, to M. De Longperrier, who thought it a forgery, and afterwards to the keeper of the Hague Museum, who, put on his guard by the publicity which by that time had been given to the theft, detained the piece and restored it to its legitimate owners. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 293 to 295. Layered discoveries. The same characteristics may be recognized in the alabaster statues found by place in one of the harem courts at Khorsabad, Nineveh, Volume 1, pages 122 to 125, and Volume 3. Plate 31, bis. They are shown on a small scale in our Figure 197, Volume 1. We may see that they were set with their backs against a wall, and that they carried a cushion on their heads, on which we have placed a vase of flowers. These statues were drowned in the Tigris. We may also quote the following monuments as examples of Assyrian statues. 1. The fragment of a seated statue found at Kali Shurgut, which we figure on page 127, Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 51 to 52. 2. The head of a statue of Ister, discovered at Kuyunjik, Smith, Assyrian Discoveries, pages 248 and 430. This head is about 9 inches high. 3. A fragment of a colossal statue of Shelly limestone, found in the same place by the same explorer, Ibid. It consists only of a part of the left shoulder. There is an inscription on the back tracing the descent of Assurbanipal from Sargon. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 284 to 288, Volume 1, Figure 173, and Volume 2. Figure 240. E. Guillaume, in his Considerations sur les principes de l'histoire du bas-relief, which was read at the annual public meeting of the 5 academies in Paris on the August 14, 1866, Die. 42. Volume 1, page 266. In this particular, the 2 large bulls from Khorsabad in the British Museum are better placed than the pair in the Louvre. Their position at the entrance to the Khorsabad transept gives an exact idea of their original arrangement. Ed. It must not be thought, however, that its employment was universal. In the palace of Sennacherib, at Kuyunjik, and in one of the palaces at Nimrud, the bulls had only 4 legs. See Perrot and Guillaume, Expedition Archéologique de la Galatie, Volume 1, pages 345, 346, and Volume 2. Plate 57. This contrivance may also be seen on the small limestone stele, covered with writing, which represents Assurbanipal carrying a basket on his head, and preparing to make an offering to the gods, British Museum, Assyrian Side Room. Look for instance at the last figure but one, on the right, in place, Volume 3. Plate 60, Figure 4. It is that of a man turning to speak to one who follows him. The feet are turned in one direction, and the head in one diametrically opposite to it. Nothing more ungraceful could be conceived. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Figure 98, Volume 2. Figures 250 and 254 and 255 and Ibid. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 185 to 196, Plates 9. X 11. And figures 172 and 173 and 174 and 178 and 183 and 198, 199, 205, 208, 213, 214, 215, 216, 223, and Ibid. Figures 273, 275. Ibid. An almost unique exception to this rule occurs in those bas-reliefs in the British Museum which represent the great hunts of Assurbanipal. We there see a company of beardless individuals marching, bareheaded, dressed in a short tunic and armed with lance and buckler. But this is an apparent rather than a real exception. The chase is not war. These men are not soldiers, but attendants on the hunt, an inferior kind of shirkari. In the battle pieces we sometimes see the eunuchs attached to the king's person fighting at his elbow. We have no reason to believe that the Egyptian fashion of wearing wigs obtained in Assyria, Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 327, 378. Herodotus tells us that in his time the Chaldeans wore long hair. 195. This is the opinion of M. Lenormant, Gazette des Beaux-Arts, Volume 25. Pages 218 to 225, and M. Menant has upheld the same thesis in a paper read before the Académie des Inscriptions, Remarques sur les portraits de rois Assyro-Chaldeans, in the Comptes Rendus for 1881, pp. 254 to 267. On this point again I regret to be unable to agree with M. Menant. I am unable to perceive any of the differences of which he speaks, c. Of his paper. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 2. Upon the discovery of these figures and their nature, see Layered, Discoveries. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 1, pages 126 to 127. The English explorer himself remarks in speaking of this relief, that the features of the men show nothing of the special type which the artist endeavored to suggest by this clumsy expedient. This is what M. Menant sees in this Babylonian stele. It represents a race with a short, thick-set body, a short neck buried between the shoulders, a flat nose and thick lips, page 259 of his paper. Layered, Discoveries. Herodotus, I. 192. Loftus gives a poor reproduction of this monument, which he found at Sincara, Travels, and we have not reproduced it, because it is in much worse condition than the terracotta dog. Herodotus, I. 193. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. Upon each of these figures appears the dog's name, which always bears some relation to the qualities he displayed in the performance of his duties. This relief is figured in Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. W. Houghton, on the Mammalia of the Assyrian Sculptures in the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology, Volume 5, pages 33 to 64, and 579 to 583. We are tempted to believe that these animals were exterminated before the days of the Sargonids by the unrelenting pursuit to which they were subjected. They are not to be found in the pictures of Assurbanipal's hunts. On the other hand, in the palace of Assurnazirpal, which dates from 2 centuries earlier, they were figured with peculiar insistence and in great detail. Layered, Monuments, First Series, Plates 11, 12, 32, 43 to 44, 46, 48 and 49. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. Layered, Monuments, First Series, Plate 58. Second Series, Plates 26 and 29. Layered, Monuments, First Series, Plates 58 and 60. Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Among the reliefs in which the Assyrian horse may be best studied, are the slabs from the palace of Sennacherib, in which a string of horses led by grooms are shown. Layered, Monuments, Second Series, Plate 7. They have no trappings or clothing of any kind to hide their form. Other incidents, figured with no less spirit, will be found in Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 355, 356, 516, 517. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Monuments, First Series, Plate 61, Second Series, Plate 50. Bada, Monuments to Nineveh, Plate 128, reproduces a group of camels sketched with a light hand, but with much truth and judgment. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. All 4 faces of this obelisk are reproduced on plates 53 to 56 of the first series of Layard's monuments. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 40 and 350, and Layard, Discoveries. Layard, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 434, 435. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. The Assyrians seem to have been much struck with these apes when they first appeared at Kala. This is shown by the care expended upon them by the sculptor of Shalmaneser's obelisk. He has reproduced the bas-relief of Asurnizirpal on a smaller scale, layered, monuments, first series, plate 55. Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Layered, monuments, series 2. Plates 32, Khorsabad, and 40, Kuyunjik. A lion hunt is to be found in the bas-reliefs of Asurnizirpal, dating from the 9th century, BC, layered, monuments, first series, plates 10 and 31. But it is especially in those of Assurbanipal, 7th century, that the animal becomes so conspicuous. On the subject of these great hunts and their arrangements, see Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 505 to 512. The custom is still kept up in Eastern countries, and their personnel is pretty much the same as it was in antiquity. See Chardin, Voyage and Purse, Langley's edition, Volume 3. And Rousselet, Linda de Rajas, pages 202, 464, 468. These caged lions are only found in the bas-reliefs of Assurbanipal. The number of lions killed between the 11th and 7th centuries BC must have been something extraordinary. Tiglath Pileser I boasts in one of his inscriptions of having done 800 lions to death. In time they must have become rare in Assyria. They must then have been brought from Chaldea or Susiana, where they have always been more abundant, and transported to the north in carts, cages and all, there to afford sport for the king. In our day lions are hardly to be found higher up the Tigris than Baghdad, but on the Euphrates they occur much farther north, as far as Bur and all over the valley of the Kabur, layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. They are most numerous in the marshes of the lower Euphrates, where they were hunted in boats by the kings of Assyria. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 361 and 508. Most of the lions of Mesopotamia have very little mane, but a few have been encountered here and there in which that feature is largely developed. These seem to have been chosen as models by the Assyrian artists. In one single series of these reliefs, there are 11 lions killed and 7 terribly wounded. The king sometimes found himself engaged with a lion at the closest quarters. In an inscription on one of these reliefs, Assurbanipal thus expresses himself. I, Assurbanipal, king of the nations, king of Assyria, fighting on foot in my great courage with a lion of terrifying size, I seized him by the ear. And, in the name of Assur and Ister, goddess of war, I put an end to his life with the lance I held in my hand. Fox Talbot in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 19. Layered, Discoveries. As to the part played by the lion in the ceremonies of the present court of Abyssinia, see Georges Perrot, Les Feuilles de M. de Sarzec en Chaldee, pages 532, 534, of the Revue des Deux Mondes for October 1, 1882. The same rock may be identified in the fragments from Teo. There is a kind of cylindrical base in the Louvre, which appears to have been cut from a material differing in no respect from that of the object figured above. Lions' heads appear upon it also. Upon the employment of the head and paws of the lion as an ornament, see also Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. In the inventory this monument is described as acquired in Syria, that is to say it was bought from M. Perrot, at Beirut. M. Perrot was a well-known collector, and objects found in Mesopotamia were continually brought to him from Mosul, Baghdad, and Bassora. There can be no doubt as to the origin of this little monument. The execution is certainly Chaldean or Assyrian. The same monster, rampant, is to be found on the Assyrian cylinder described by M. Lenormand under the title, Le Dieu de livre de l'attaque de mauvais esprits, Gazette archéologique, 1878. As to where this colossus was found, see Layered, Nineveh, Volume 1. De Longperrier, Du Bronzes Antiques de Vannes, in his Oeuvre, Volume 1, pages 275 to 278. In de Longperrier's reproduction of one of these figures, the ring attached to its back is shown. G. Perrot, Les Feuilles de M. de Sarzec en Chaldee, in the Revue des Deux Mondes, for October 1, 1882. A methodical account of the whole enterprise will be found in a forthcoming work, which will bear for title, Découvertes en Chaldee, par M. E. de Sarzec, ouvrage publié par les soins de la conservation des antiquités orientales au Musée du Louvre. Its quarto size will make it a more convenient work than those of Bada and Place. The illustrations will be produced by the Dujardin heliogravure process. Said Hassan and Chatra, of which we have made use to give some approximate idea as to where Teo is situated, are marked upon the map given by Loftus, Travels and Researches, and Volume 1, Chapter 1, Section 4. M. Oppert believes that he has discovered in the inscriptions of Chaldea, proof that the stone he employed came from Egypt. We cannot attempt to discuss the phrases which seem to him to bear that sense. We have some difficulty, however, in believing either that they took the trouble to transport such ponderous blocks across the desert, or that they sent them on a voyage round the whole peninsula of Arabia. A voyage that must have lasted some months, and that when similar materials were within reach. See what Mr. Taylor says about the district which is called Hedra, heap of stones, from Hadjar, stone, from the numerous masses of black granite that may be found there. This district is almost opposite Skinafi, not far from Baron Najef, Notes on Abu Sharian. Of Volume 15, of the Royal Asiatic Society's Journal. Hussey, Les Feuilles de la Chaldee. Extracted from the Revue Archéologique for January, 1881. Perhaps we should rather give the Chaldean artist the credit of having produced a not untruthful bird's-eye view. The bodies in the sepulchre are evidently stretched side by side, and they diminish in size from front to back, as their distance from the eye of the spectator increases. The two living men are mounting upon the edge, or wall, of the grave, an edge such as the tomb figured on. Of Volume 1, Figure 164, must have had before its lid was put on. In these two figures there is an unmistakable attempt to give the effect of distance in varying their size. A curious detail in this relief is the post with a rope knotted round it that appears in the lower left-hand corner. Ed. It has been thought that the inscriptions contain proof, that, during the period, to which this primitive art belongs, Sirtella was the capital of a small independent kingdom, while the title of Chaldea, Patisi, or governor, would seem to show that in his time it formed part of a larger state. Chaldea can only have been a great feudatory. His position must have been similar to the known princes in Egypt. Hussey, in the Comptes Rendus de l'Académie des Inscriptions for August 18, 1882. A 10th statue of Chaldea, very much mutilated, is not yet exhibited. There is also the lower part of a small seated statue, without inscription. The great seated statue that occupies the middle of the room is 5 feet 3 inches in height, and has no head. One of the standing statues is 4 feet 8 inches high. The one figured in our plate 6 is only 4 feet 2 inches. The small statue called the Architect, figure 96, is 3 feet 1 inch. It will be seen that some of these figures are over, and some under, life-size, one only, if we allow for the head, will correspond with what we may call the height of a man. Letter from M. de Sarzec read to the Académie des Inscriptions on the December 2, 1881, reprinted in Hussey, Feuilles de Chaldee. On the knees of these seated figures we find the scale, the stylus and the plan of a fortified city that we explained on pages 327 and 328 of our first volume. Hussey, Les Feuilles de Chaldee. Some may be inclined to think that the bald head may once have been protected by a covering cut from a separate block. This idea was suggested to us by the existence in the British Museum of a kind of wig of black stone, Nimrod Gallery, Case H. It is carved to imitate hair, and, in front, has a kind of crest, the whole being cut from one piece of stone. It may have been used to surmount a limestone figure, and the contrast between the light color of the one material, and the blackness of the other would be neither unpleasant nor unfitting. In another case, A, of the same gallery, we find beards and wigs made some of glass, others of a sandy frit imitating lapis lazuli. The use of these disconnected pieces must then have been very widespread. But we doubt whether the Teo head ever had such a covering, because that part of its surface which would in such a case have been hidden from sight, is finished with the same care as all the rest. If the artist had included a wig in his calculations, would he have taken the pains he did with the modeling and polishing of the cranium? In the sculptures representing the erection of Sennacherib's palace, many of the workmen have their heads protected from the sun by a turban resembling that of the Teo statue. This can hardly be clearly seen in small-scale reproductions, Volume I. Figures 151 and 152, but Layard gives two of these heads on the original scale, for the express purpose of calling attention to their singular headdress, Monuments, Series 2. Plate 16. Here M. Husey answers M. Menant, who thought he could discover in these two heads that the sculptor's models had not been Semites, but belonged to the primitive race, of Turanians, no doubt, by whom the Chaldean civilization was founded, les Files de M. de Sarzec en Mesopotamia, in the number for December, 1880, of the Gazette de Beaux-Arts. Husey, Les Files, and page 2. Husey, Les Files de Chaldea, pages 13, 14. De Longperrier, Musée Napoleon III, plate 2. Art in Ancient Egypt, volume 2. Figure 271. Husey, Catalogue. Husey, Les Files de la Chaldea. We may give as an instance the very small fragment of a relief in white stone, representing the Indian humped bull, the zebu, which has also been met with in the Assyrian bas-reliefs. The treatment is very fine. See de Longperrier, Monuments Antiques de la Chaldea découvertes et rapports par M. de Sarzec, Ovra, Volume 1. The learned archaeologist, of whom the writing of this paper was one of the last occupations, saw in this fragment evidence of worship rendered to the great rivers that watered and fertilized Mesopotamia. The double stream of water is the symbol of Naharaim, or the two rivers, a symbol whose presence in other objects from the same region he points out. Loftus, Travels. Describes a statue of black granite that he found at Hammam in Lower Chaldea. So far as we can tell from his short description, it must bear no slight resemblance to the Teo statues. The right shoulder was bare and had an inscription engraved upon it. The rest of the figure was clothed, and the hands were crossed upon the knees. The head was missing. At Warka the same traveler saw a bas-relief representing a man striking an animal. It was of basalt and was broken into several pieces. Among the objects acquired in 1877 by the British Museum, I find mentioned a fragment of black granite or basalt, which seems to belong to a statue of Hammurabi, king of Babylon about 1,500 years before our era. Account of the income and expenditure of the British Museum for 1878. Is not this the broken statue which now figures in the gallery under the name of Gudea? At the first moment the inscription may not have been readily deciphered. The summary report presented to Parliament seems, indeed, to name Hammurabi with some hesitation. This type comes from Teo. Among the statuettes found there by M. de Sarzec, there were some in which it was reproduced, but they were all inferior to the example figured above. Layard found statuettes inspired by the same motive in a mound near Baghdad, Discoveries. Husey, Catalogue. Ibid. Layard found this type near Baghdad, Discoveries. And Loftus encountered a great number of examples in his explorations at Susa, Travels, and those brought by him to London are quite similar to the statuette in the Louvre that we have chosen for reproduction, Husey, Catalogue. In the case of the Caillou Michaud, this has been clearly established by M. Oppert, Expedition Scientifique, Volume 1, pages 253, 254. He remarks that the betrothed of the person who had caused the stone to be cut, is spoken of as a native of the town of Sargon. So that the stone must be later than the end of the 8th century, BC. And all the monuments belonging to this class bear such a strong mutual resemblance, that their dates cannot be very widely separated. They are reproduced on a large scale, both texts and figures, in the cuneiform inscriptions of Western Asia, Volume 3. Plates 41 to 45, and Volume 4. Plates 41 to 43. We have reproduced 2, in Volume 1, Figure 10, and above, Figure 43. According to Millen, who was the first to draw attention to this monument, its material is a black marble. It would be a mistake to call it basalt. Monuments Antique and Edits, Volume 1. Note 6. The inscription on the Caillou Michaud has been translated by Oppert, Chronologie des Assyriens et des Babylonians, and by Fox Talbot in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 18. Pages 53 to 75. There is a cast of this caillou in the Assyrian side room at the British Museum. Ed. The weight of these objects was in itself sufficient to prevent them being easily removed. The Caillou Michaud weighs rather more than 70 pounds. Hussey, Catalogue. Sigma tau iota delta tau omicron nu beta alpha beta upsilon lambda nu iota rho omicron kappa alpha lambda lambda omicron kappa tau omega nu eta, nu theta alpha gamma lambda mu gamma alpha tau omicron delta iota nu iota kappa alpha tau mu epsilon nu omicron nu chi sigma epsilon omicron nu, I, 183. Pi, kappa rho alpha tau nu alpha beta sigma epsilon omega tau rho alpha tau sigma kappa epsilon alpha sigma epsilon nu gamma lambda mu alpha tau alpha chi rho sigma phi epsilon rho lambda alpha tau alpha, delta iota, rho alpha, alpha, Diodorus, 2. 9. 5-8. The Five Great Monarchies, and, Volume 2. See Ante. Layered, Monuments, 2nd Series, Plate 5. For the reasons which led him to take this step, see the introduction to the first series of plates published in the Monuments. The original arrangement of these things is shown in the second series of Layard's Monuments, Plate 4. We have round-headed steels of Assurnazirpal, of Shalmaneser II, of Samusvol II, and of Sargon. Those of other princes are figured in the reliefs. In the Balawat gates we find Shalmaneser erecting them wherever his conquests led him, Plate 12. We have not copied the uniform dark green tint forced upon the English publication by the necessity for printing in one color. We have borrowed from the fragments in the possession of M. Schlumberger the broken hues of the patina deposited upon the bronze by age, a patina which has, perhaps, been too much removed by the cleaning to which the pieces in London have been subjected. In page 3 of his introduction, Mr. Pinches speaks of a crocodile and a young hippopotamus. I do not think that either of those animals can ever have lived in the cold waters of Lake Van, which receives, in the spring, such a large quantity of melted snow. On the other hand, the argument applied by M. Perrot to architectural forms, see Volume 1, pages 139, Note 2, and 395, may here be invoked by Mr. Pinches. It is more likely that the artist introduced such animals as were to be found in the rivers and meres of Mesopotamia, than that he ascertained how Lake Van was peopled before he began his work. Ed. In order that we might give two interesting subjects on a single page, we have here brought together two divisions that do not belong to the same band in the original. Herodotus, I. 184. In repeating this hypothesis we have followed Professor Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 2. Pages 119 to 121, to us it appears worthy of extreme respect. See above, page 40. See also Layered, Monuments, First Series, Plates 57 to 67. Among the reliefs in which the transport of the materials for Sargon's palace is represented, there is one which shows timber being dragged down to the Phoenician coast. Here the sea is no longer indicated merely by sinuous lines and a few fishes as in most of the earlier reliefs, there are all kinds of animals, shells, turtles, crabs, frogs, and even sea serpents. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Plate 34. In one place we find a wooded hill, with trees still of indeterminate form, Plate 78. In another we may recognize pines in the forest traversed by the Assyrian cavalry, Plates 108 to 113. Birds fly among the branches and several among them fall pierced with the arrows of the hunters. Other trees bear fruit, Plate 114. Partridges run upon the slopes of the hill. See also in the basalt reliefs from the building we have called a temple, a coniferous tree of some kind, probably a cypress, the general form of which is very well rendered, place, Nineveh, plate 48. This stele now belongs to the Berlin Museum. It has recently been the subject of an important work by a learned German Assyriologist, Herr Schrader, Die Sargenstil des Berliner Museums, in the Abhandlungen of the Berlin Academy for 1881. He gives a translation of the inscription, with a commentary, showing the date of the stele to be 707, or the 15th year of Sargon's reign. These lions are figured by Layard, Monuments, First Series, Volume 1. Their inscriptions are brought together in a single plate in the Discoveries. The Aramaic texts will be published in the Corpus Inscriptionum Semiticorum, in the first installment of the part devoted to Aramaic inscriptions. These lions of Khorsabad and Nimrud may be compared, both for type and use, to the bronze lion found at Abydos, on the Hellespont, in 1860. M. De Vogue has made us acquainted with the latter in the pages of the Revue Archéologique for January, 1862. His article, which contains a reproduction both of the monument as a whole and of its inscription, and an explanation of the latter, has been reprinted in the Mélanges d'Archéologie Orientale, 8 vo, 1868, pages 179 to 196. Mr. Norris has published a special study of the weights in the British Museum, on the Assyrian and Babylonian weights, in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 16. Botanists are of opinion that the conventional representations of the marsh vegetation suggests the horsegrass, or shave grass, priel, rather than the arundodonax, in which the leaves are longer and thinner. See Layard, Monuments, 2nd Series, plates 12 and 13. Layard, Monuments, 2nd Series, plates 14, 15. Layard, Monuments, 2nd Series, plate 17. Sennacherib caused his sculptors to celebrate the campaign in which he subdued the peoples of Lower Chaldea. Like the Arab of today, they took refuge when pursued among the marshes in the neighborhood of the Persian Gulf. Layard, Monuments, 2nd Series, plate 25. The light, flat-bottomed boats, with their sharp prows, are shown pushing through the reeds, and bending them down into the water to clear a passage. The slabs taken from this corridor are now in the Kuyunjik Gallery of the British Museum, and numbered from 37 to 43. See also Layard's Monuments, 2nd Series, plates 7 to 9. See Layard, Monuments, 2nd Series, plates 47 to 49. And these sculptures were discovered and described for the first time by M. Ruet, the immediate successor of M. Bada, at Mosul, Journal Asiatique, 1846, pages 280 to 290. More detailed descriptions will be found in Layard, Discoveries, pp. 207 to 216, and in Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 161 to 164. The latest and most complete translation of the Bavian inscriptions, or rather of the one inscription that is repeated in 3 different places, has been given by M. Pognon, under the following title, L'Inscription de Bavian, Text, Traduction et Commentaire philologique avec 3 appendices et un glossaire, 1 volume 8 vo, in 2 parts, 1879 and 1880, in the Bibliothèque de l'École de Hautes Études. Layard, Discoveries. Layard tells us that near the entrance to the gorge, and under the alluvial earth carried down by the stream, he found the remains of carefully built stone walls. But he is silent as to the character of the building to which they may have belonged. Discoveries. See the vignette on page 214 of Layard's Discoveries. Perrot and Guillaume, Exploration archéologique de la Galatie, Volume 1, pages 367 to 373, and Volume 2. Plates 72 to 80. Layard, Discoveries. Layard, Discoveries. Mr. Layard intended to give accurate and complete drawings of all the bas-reliefs at Bavian. For that purpose he dispatched to the valley a young artist named Bell, who had been sent out to him by the authorities of the British Museum. Unhappily, this young man was drowned while bathing in the torrent, in July, 1851. Before his death he seems only to have copied the great relief, hence, in Layard's great work Bavian is represented only by the plate we have copied. In the discoveries a few additional sketches are given. Page 203. In the valley of the Nahr el-Kelb, there are 5 or 6 Assyrian reliefs mingled with those of Egyptian origin. They may at once be distinguished from the works of the Ramesses by their arched tops. The only one of which the inscriptions are still legible, is that of Esarhaddon. See Monuments Inédits de l'Institut de Correspondance Archéologique, 1858, Plate 51, Figure F, and especially Lepsius, Ägyptische Denkmäler, Part 3. Plate 197, Figure D. Judging from their style and the historical information we possess, these steles may be attributed to Tiglath-Pileser, Asurnazirpal, Shalmaneser II, and Sennacherib. The remaining figures must be referred to other princes. Quite lately Mr. Boscawen has published an interesting article, The Monuments and Inscriptions on the Rocks at Nahr el-Kelb, in the 7th volume of the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology, pages 331 to 352. It is accompanied by a general view of the site, and a very careful plan of that part of the valley in which the Egyptian and Assyrian inscriptions are to be found. Professor Lortet has also paid a recent visit to the valley. We are indebted to one of his photographs for our figure 122, Tour du Monde, 1882. We should have expected to find traces of these Assyrian rock sculptures on the shores of Lake Van, where the princes of Nineveh so often appeared as conquerors. So far, however, nothing beyond cuneiform inscriptions has been found. There are no royal effigies, Scholl's, Memoires sur le lac de Van, in the Journal Asiatique for April-June, 1840, and Layard, Discoveries, Chapter 18. Layard, Discoveries. Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. See Volume 1, page 75, and Figure 13. The bas-reliefs of Malphi have been described by Layard, Nineveh, Volume 1, pages 230, 231, and, with greater minuteness, by Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 153 to 160. The latter alone gives a reproduction of them, made from photographs. Between the two accounts there is one considerable discrepancy. Layard speaks of 4 groups of 9 figures each, Place of 3 only. Other cylinders belonging to the same group will be found reproduced in Layard Recherches sur le culte de Venus, notably in Plate 4. Figures 9, 12. French National Library, No. 710. Florence Museum. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1. Pages 120 to 122. Flandin published in the Revue des Deux Mondes, June 15, and July 1, 1845, 2 papers under the general title of Voyage archéologique à Nineveh, and headed severally L'Architecture Assyrienne, and La Sculpture Assyrienne. The assertion to which we have alluded will be found in the second of the 2 articles, at page 106. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Volume 5. Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 82, 83. Ibid, Volume 3. Plate 46, No. 4. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Volume 5. Layard, Nineveh, Volume 2. Upon this question of polychromy in the reliefs, a very precise note of Layard's may be consulted with Prophet, Nineveh, Volume 2. The discussion has also been very judiciously summed up by Rawlinson, The 5 Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 357 to 365. One of the plates from which we may gather the best idea of how this sculpture must have looked when its coloring was intact, is that in which Layard gives a reproduction of one of the winged bulls as it appeared when first uncovered, Monuments. First Series, Plate 92. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Plates 12 and 14. Place, Nineveh, Volume 1. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Plate 113. Ibid, Plates 43 and 53. Bada, Monument, and Plate 62. Ibid, Plates 61 and 76, and Volume 5. See especially at the south end of the Nimrod Gallery, the upper part of a male figure, numbered 17a. The black of the hair and beard has preserved much of its strength. At Kuyunjik there were no traces whatever of color. Nineveh, Volume 2. Husey, Catalogue de figurines en terre quite du Musée du Louvre. Husey, Catalogue, and Ibid. Layard also found many of these blue statuettes at Khorsabad, discoveries. These fragments were found by Layard in one of the small temples at Nimrud, discoveries, pages 357, 358. M. Sully Prudhomme has lately embodied this idea in his verses addressed to the Venus of the Louvre, devant la Venus de Milo in the Revue Politique for January 6, 1883. Dans les lignes du marbre au plus rien n'y subsiste. De l'éphémère de modèles de chair. Le ciseau de sculpteur, incorruptible artiste. En isolant le beau, nous le ren chaste éclair. Si tendre à voir que soit la couleur d'une saine rose. C'est dans le contour seul, presque immatériel. Que le souffle divin s'y relève et t'y dépose. La grâce que elle exprime et t'y ravit l'émotion. Saluens donc si t'y artque, trop haute pour la foule. Abandon de corps les éléments charnels. Et per, du genre humain en égard que le mole. Nen dain consacre que les traits éternels. Herodotus, I. 195. Strabo says the same thing, but in a passage, 16. I. 20, in which he borrows from Herodotus without acknowledgement. There are fine series of these seals, or cylinders, both in the Louvre and in the Cabinet des Antiques of the French National Library. But the collection of the British Museum is the richest of all. It possesses about 660 examples, against the 500 of the Cabinet des Antiquités, and the 300 of the Louvre. The cabinet at The Hague has 150. A single French collector, M. de Klerk, possesses more than 400, most of them in very fine condition and of great interest. He is preparing to publish a descriptive catalogue of his treasures, accompanied by photogravure facsimiles of every cylinder. According to M. Menant, the total number of these cylinders now in European galleries can fall very little short of 3,000. M.Fr. Lenormand explains this talismanic value of the cylinders very clearly in his Étude sur la signification de sujets de quelques cylindres babyloniens et assyriens, Gazette archéologique, 1879. We have derived most of the information contained in this chapter from the works of M. Menant, who, for many years past has given more study to these cylinders than any other savant. We have found his essay sur les pierres graves de l'Asie occidentale of special value, but we have also made use of the various reports he has published in the Archives de Missions, relating to the foreign collections visited by him. And of his papers read before the Académie des Inscriptions. We have, moreover, consulted the following works, not, we hope, without profit, de Gobineau, Catalogue d'une collection d'Intales Asiatiques, Revue archéologique, New Series, Volume 27. E. Saldi, Les Cylindres Babyloniens, leur usage et leur classification, Ibid Volume 28. And Les Arts Mecanis, by the same author, 1 Volume 8 VO, Leroux, 1881, Chapter 1, Les Cames et les Pierres Graves. The thickest cylinders are found among those that appear the most ancient. I measured one, in the Cabinet des Antiquités, that was barely less than an inch in diameter. On the other hand, there are some very small ones in existence. Menant, Essai sur les pierres graves de l'Asie occidentale, Introduction. In the British Museum M. Menant made a careful examination of a tablet on which these successive impressions from a cylinder allowed the whole of the scene with which it was engraved to be studied, Rapport sur les cylindres assyro-chaldeans du Musée Britannique. In the Archives de Missions Scientifiques, 1879. Even as late as 1854, a fine connoisseur like de Longperrier could think that the cylinders were purely amulets and were never used as seals, Notice de Antiquités Assyriennes Exposés dans les Galeries du Louvre, 3rd edition. No such assertion could be made now. Hundreds of impressions are to be found on the terracotta tablets from Mesopotamia, and moreover, we find this formula in the inscription borne by many of the cylinders, seal, kanuku, of so-and-so, son of so-and-so. In Assyrian the word kanuku meant, as the word seal with us, both the instrument used and the impression it gave, menant, sa, introduction. Some of these impressions are figured in layered, discoveries, chapters 6 and 25. See also his monuments, 2nd series, plate 69. The Louvre possesses a cylinder mounted in this fashion. It was found by place in the foundations of the Khorsabad Palace. See the Longpurier, notice. Number 469 in the catalogue. Taylor, Notes on the Ruins of Mugayer. In the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 15. Layered, Discoveries. A few cylinders of fine stone dating apparently from the early monarchy, are exceptions to this rule. M. Menant quotes a cylinder of saffron chalcedony, which he ascribes to the reign of Dungi, the son of Arcam, Essay sur les Pierres Graves, pages 141 to 143. Elsewhere he mentions an onyx cylinder in the Cabinet d'Antiques, No. 870, which bears an inscription proving it to have been the seal of the scribe or secretary who served the son of Karagalzu, whom he places at the end of the 15th century BC. We also find jasper cylinders that appear, so far as their execution and the costume of the figures engraved on them may show, to have come from the same workshops, Ibid, as those of the softer materials. This, we acknowledge, is a difficulty. But in the first place they may have now and then succeeded, even in the early years of the art, in fashioning materials harder than those with which they were familiar, by redoubling the patience and time spent upon the work. And, secondly, several kings separated from each other by centuries must have borne the same name, and it is perhaps a little bold to determine the age of a monument from the fact that it is engraved with this or that royal name. Who can say that none of these little monuments were reworked in the time of Nebuchadnezzar? Archaism was then in fashion. The writing of the early monarchy was imitated in official documents. Is it not probable enough that, while they were in the vein, they copied the seals of the old and almost legendary kings? They would reproduce them in their entirety, both images and texts, but in obedience to the taste of the day, they would execute the copies in those harder and more precious materials which his increased skill permitted the workman to attack. In spite of a few doubtful instances, we may repeat the general rule we have laid down, that the great majority of those cylinders that bear incontestable marks of a high antiquity, are cut from materials inferior in hardness to the precious stones, or even to the quartzes. E. Saldi, Les Cylindres Babyloniens, Revue Archéologique, Volume 28. Ibid. The 3 pages in which M. Saldi sums up the result of his inquiries, may be studied with advantage, Les Arts Mecanis, pages 62 to 64. C.J. Menant, Observations sur trois cylindres orientaux, Gazette de Beaux-Arts, December, 1879. Or, more correctly, Dioscurides, Delta Iota Omicron Sigma Kappa Omicron Upsilon Rho Delta Eta, according to the texts. Ed. As to the connection of the Greek Heracles with Isdabar, see a passage quoted from Sayce by Mansell, Gazette Archéologique, 1879, pages 116, 117. The New York cylinder is only 1.52 inches high. It has been slightly enlarged in our woodcut, so that its workmanship might be better shown. Upon the exploits of these 2 individuals, and the place they occupy upon the cylinders, see Menant, S.A., and, pages 66, e. Seek. Menant, Essay sur les Pierres Graves, figure 86. Ibid. De Longpurier, Oeuvre, Volume 1. Compare our figure 17, Volume 1, and M. Menant's observations upon the double-faced individual in whom the original androgynous type of the human race has been recognized by some, S.A., and, pages 111 to 120. We are inclined to agree with him in supposing the double profile to be no more than a convention, whose strangeness is diminished when we remember that it occurred upon the convex sides of a cylinder, where the eye of the spectator did not grasp it all at once, as upon the flat impression. In choosing such an arrangement, the artist seems to have desired to connect the figure both with the seated god and the figures on the other side. It is an expedient of the same nature as the 5 legs of the 9 white bulls. Menant, S.A., and M. Menant mentions some other myths, with which this scene may be connected. The true explanation cannot be decided, however, until the Chaldee mythology is better known than at present. Ibid. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Figure 85. Menant, S.A., and pages 61-96. Menant, S.A. Izdubar contends not only with monsters, he pursues, for his own pleasure, all the beasts of the desert and mountain, like the Nimrod of Genesis, he is a mighty hunter before the Lord. See the cylinders figured and explained by S. Hafner, La Chasse de l'Assyrian, in the Gazette Archéologique, 1879. -184. Menant, S.A. See above, page 144, and figure 70. Menant, S.A., pages 55-62. Berosus, Fragment 1, Section 4, in Volume 2. Of the Fragmenta Historicorum Graecorum of C. H. Muller. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Volume 5. Layard, Discoveries. These 2 cylinders are respectively numbered 937 and 942 in the Cabinet des Antiques. Menant, Catalogue de Cylindres Orientaux du Cabinet Royal de Médailles de la Haye, The Hague, 4-2, number 135. Upon these types see Menant, Archives de Missions, 1879, pages 128-9. The signet figured above belonged to a member of the tribe called Ejebai, a group of merchants and bankers who seem to have held the highest rank upon the market of Babylon, both under the last national kings, and under the Achaemenid. Archives de Missions, 1879. The charging animal seems rather to be a wild boar. The shape of its head and body, the ridge of hair along the spine, the shape of the legs and feet, and its action in charging, all suggest a boar, a suggestion confirmed by the action of the hunter, who receives the rush of the animal on a kind of scarf or cloak, while he buries his boar spear in its back. Ed. The cylinder published by Layard, Introduction à l'étude du culte public et de mystères de Mitra, Plate 25. Number 4. See on the subject of the inscription upon it, Levy, Siegel und Gemen, Plate 1, number 15. A certain number of intaglios with Aramaic characters, which belong to the same class, have been studied and described by M. de Vogue, in his Mélanges d'Archéologie Orientale, pages 120-130. National Library, Paris, number 1086. National Library, number 978. Menant, Emprientes de Cachets Assyro-Chaldeans Relevés au Musée Britannique, Archives de Missions, 1882. Figure 5. Ibid, Figure 25. A kneeling figure occurs on a contract dated from the 7th century, Menant, Ibid. Figure 7. Several impressions in the London collection show us personages in the modern attitude of prayer before the figure of a god overshadowed by huge wings. Ibid, Figures 26 and 27. Menant, Empreinte de Cachets, and Figure 65. Deloyens collection, number 188. Diameter 1 inch. Number 986. Ibid, Figures 20, 24 and 27 and 30 and 31 and 41, 44. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 290, 291. Menant, Rapport sur les cylindres du Musée Britannique. Chaldea, Les cylindres Babylonians, Revue Archéologique, Volume 28. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Figure 85. Layard, Discoveries. A scarab of Amenophis III has also been found. Layard also tells us that he found several scarabaei of Egyptian manufacture, while excavating at Nimrud, and others were brought to him which have been found in different parts of Mesopotamia. Account of the income and expenditure of the British Museum for 1878. In a recently published work, critic de Egyptischen Ornaments, Archaeologisk Studie, with 2 lithographic plates, Marburg, 8 VO. 1883, Herr Ludwig von Sibbel has investigated the influence exercised by what he calls Asiatic ornament upon Egyptian art, after the commencement of the Second Theban Empire. The impression left by his inquiry, which is conducted with much order and critical acumen, is that Egypt, by the intermediary of the Phoenicians, received more from Assyria and Chaldea than she gave. This influence was exercised chiefly by the numerous metal objects imported into the Nile Valley from Western Asia, where metallurgy was more advanced and more active than in Egypt. We may have doubts as to some of Herr von Sibbel's comparisons, and may think he sometimes exaggerates the Asiatic influence, but none the less may his work be read both with profit and interest. See above, page 98. Layered, Monuments, First Series, Plate 7. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Chapter 4. Section 1. Volume 1, Chapter 2. Section 7. The ornament reproduced in our Plate 13 is borrowed from a plate of Layard's Monuments, First Series, Plate 80, and the 2 subjects brought together in Plate 14 are taken from Plate 55 of the second series. Our Plate 15 brings together, on a smaller scale, the figures which occupy Plates 29, 30, and 31 of Places Nineveh. Layard, Nineveh, Volume 2. Place, Nineveh, Plate 32. Layard, Discoveries. Note. Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 251, 252. Lepsius, Les métaux dans les inscriptions égyptiennes. Translated into French by W. Berend, and with additions by the author, 1877. Layard, Discoveries. Ibid. Layard, Nineveh, Volume 2. Layard, Discoveries. Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Diodorus, 2. 8, 4. Rawlinson, The 5 Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 91, 92. We borrow figures 163, 8 from Professor Rawlinson. Some of these, he tells us, are from drawings by Mr. Churchill, the artist who accompanied Loftus into Chaldea and Susiana, the rest are taken from objects now in the British Museum. We borrow the figures numbered 183, 184, 186 and 187, from the plate accompanying a remarkable paper by M. Helbig, in which he points out the similarities that exist between this Ninevite pottery, and the oldest pottery of Attica and the Aegean Islands, Osservazioni sopra la provenienza della decorazione geometrica. In the Annals de l'Institut de Correspondance Archéologique, 1875. The tracings reproduced by M. Helbig, Tavola di Aggiunta, H., were made by Mr. Murray. Our figures 182 and 185 and 188 were taken from drawings made by myself in the British Museum. Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Birch, History of Ancient Pottery, 2nd edition, 1873. Birch, History of Ancient Pottery, 2nd edition, 1873. The British Museum possesses some fine examples of these coffins. They were transported to England by Loftus, who had some difficulty in bringing them home intact. See Loftus, Travels and Researches, and Layard, Discoveries, pages 558 to 561, and Birch, History of Ancient Pottery, pages 105 to 107. In the upper parts of the mounds at Warka and Niffer, where these slipper-shaped coffins were packed in thousands, fragments of glazed earthenware, plates and vases, were also found. They seem to date from the same period. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Volume 5. Rawlinson, The 5 Great Monarchies, Volume 1, pages 389 to 391. On this subject see a note by Sir David Brewster, appended to Layard, Discoveries, pages 674 to 676. Layard, Discoveries. Layard, Nineveh, Volume 1. Discoveries. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. A detailed description of this curious object will be found in a note supplied to Layard by Sir David Brewster, who made a careful examination of the lens, discoveries. See Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, and Volume 1, pages 95 to 97. On the richness of the metalliferous deposits about the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates, see Volume 1, pages 124, 125. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. Ibid. Place, Nineveh, Volume 2. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 303 to 305 and 379. Place, Nineveh, Volume 1, pages 84 to 89, and Plate 70, 71. A certain number of iron implements are exhibited in the British Museum, Kuyunjik Gallery, Case E. They were found for the most part at Nimrud, by Sir H. Layard, Discoveries, pages 174 and 194. Among objects particularly mentioned by him are feet of chairs, tables, and mattocks and hammers, the heads of arrows and lances, and a double-handled saw 62 inches long. Place, Nineveh, Volume 1. And Plate 71, Figures 5, 6 and 7. This is formally stated by Dr. Percy, who furnished Layard with a long note upon the composition of the Assyrian bronzes, discoveries. At Nimrud, the latter found helmets and cuirasses of iron with surface ornaments of bronze, Nineveh, Volume 1. He speaks of this proceeding as characteristic of Assyrian metalwork, discoveries. To the evidence of Layard, which we have already had occasion to quote on this point, we may add that of Rich, Kurdistan, Volume 1, pages 176 and 222. Layard, Discoveries, Chapter 8. See Dr. Percy's note, at the end of the Discoveries. Layard, Discoveries, pages 176 to 178. Nahum, 2. 9. E. Flandin, Voyage archéologique. Layard, Discoveries, pages 198, 199. In 1882 these fragments were in the Nimrud Central Saloon. In the Assyrian side room, close to the door, there is another throne whose bronze casing might be restored almost in its entirety. Its decoration is less rich, however, than that of the thrones of which we have been speaking. A poor drawing of it may be found in George Smith's Assyrian Discoveries. This is not complete, about a third of it seems to be missing. Reasoning from the analogy of the ivories above mentioned, it might be thought that this fragmentary column belonged to the balustrade of a window. M. Dulafoy, who first drew our attention to the fragment, provided us with a photograph of it, and is of that opinion. In Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Plate 164, a bronze bull's head is figured which must have been used as the arm of a chair. This motive was by no means rare. Some more examples will be found reproduced in Layard, Nineveh, Volume 2. At Malthai there are human figures between the uprights of the throne on which the second deity is seated. They may be seen more clearly in Place's large plate, number 45, than in our necessarily small engraving. 1 Kings x 18. Layard, Discoveries. Smith, Assyrian Discoveries, pages 431, 432. George Smith, Assyrian Discoveries. As soon as these ivories arrived at the British Museum, the learned keeper of the Oriental antiquities was struck by their Egyptian character. A paper which he published at the time may be consulted with Prophet, Birch, Observations on 2 Egyptian cartouches, and some other ivory ornaments found at Nimrud, in the Transactions of the Royal Society of Literature, 2nd Series, Volume 3. Pages 151 to 177. Layard, Discoveries. Layard, Monuments, 1st Series, Plate 24. Ibid, Plates 55 and 56. In the second stage of reliefs, counting from the bottom. Among the ivories in Case C of the Nimrud Gallery there is a kind of blackish ivory egg, which may have served as the knob of a scepter. In an oval crowned by the uraeus between two feathers, we find an inscription which appears to be Phoenician. It has been read as the name of a king of Cyprus. Loftus, in a letter addressed to the Athenaeum, 1855, speaks of other ivories from the southwestern palace at Nimrud. They are the remains of a throne, and were found in a deposit of wood ashes. He says there was a shaft formed by figures placed back to back and surmounted by a capital shaped like a flower. There was also, according to the same authority, a Phoenician inscription. See Volume 1, pages 299 to 302. My researches were not confined to the ivories in the cases. I also went through the thousands of pieces in the closed drawers which are not shown, in some instances because of their broken condition, in others because they are merely duplicates of better specimens in the selection exhibited. The feet found by Sir H. Layard at Nimrud must, as he conjectured, have belonged to one of these tripods, Discoveries, pages 178 to 179. We should also mention another vase, shaped like the muzzle of a lion, which was used to take liquids out of a large crater set upon a stand, Bada, Monument to Nineveh, Volume 1, Plate 76. See also M. Bada's Plate 162, where the chief examples from the bas-reliefs are figured. Layard, Discoveries. In the 8th chapter of the Discoveries, Layard gives a sort of inventory, rather desultory in form, perhaps, but nevertheless very instructive and valuable. Of the principal objects found in the magazines, we have borrowed largely from these pages. The most important of the cups are reproduced, in whole or in part, in the plates numbered from 57 to 68 of the Monuments, 2nd series. A complete and accurate study of the cups and other objects of the same kind discovered in Western Asia will be found in M. Albert Dumont's Les Céramiques de la Grèce propre, pages 112 to 129. Layard, Monuments, 2nd series, Plate 68. This platter is figured in Layard's Monuments, Plate 63, but our drawing was made from the original. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 87 to 89. It is numbered 619 in the museum inventory. It bears an inscription in Aramaic characters. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Figures 280 and 281. Inscriptions of this kind have been found on 5 or 6 of the bronze platters in the British Museum. They are about to be printed in the Corpus Inscriptionum Semiticarum, Part 2. Inscriptions Aramea, Volume 1. Thus, according to M. de Vogue, who has examined the inscriptions upon the cups recently cleaned, 3 of the cups from Nimrud bear respectively the names of Balazar, Bal protects him, El Sila, El pardons him, and Beharel, El has chosen him. Balazar was a scribe. See above. Note 2. See Pris, Histoire de l'Art Égyptien, Volume 2. Plate entitled Le Pharaon Khunaten servi par la Reine. The kind of saucer held by the queen is more like the Assyrian pattery in shape. See in Pris Histoire, the plates classed under the head Arts Industrials, and especially the 4 entitled vases N or email et cloisonné. In all these I can only find one patera, in the plate called Collection de Vases du Règne de Ramesses III. There is nothing to show that the vases here figured were not earthenware. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Figures 287 and 288. See also the great vultures on the ceilings, Ibid figure 282, and winged females, Ibid figure 287. Pris, Histoire de l'Art Égyptien, Volume 2, the plate entitled Types de Sphinx. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Fig. 239, and Pris, in the plate above quoted. A cursory glance through the pages dedicated by Pris to the industrial arts is conclusive on this point, the heads of snakes and horses. The figures of Negroes and prisoners of war are almost invariably placed back to back on the objects they are used to adorn. Examples of this abound, but in order to understand what we may call the principle of this ornamentation it will suffice to refer to figures 314 and 327 and 328 of the 2nd volume of our History of Art in Ancient Egypt. In Pris' plate entitled Choix de bijoux de diverses époques, there is a bracelet with a central motive recalling that of our cup. It shows us two griffins separated by a palmette from which rises a tall stem of papyrus between several pairs of volutes. This object is, however, almost unique of its kind, and we do not exactly know to what epoch it belongs. May it not belong to a period when Egyptian art began to be affected by that of Mesopotamia, an influence that is betrayed in more than one particular? According to Hervon Sibyl, who has studied Egyptian ornament with so much care, this motive of two animals facing each other did not appear before the 19th dynasty. And he looks upon it as purely Asiatic in its origin, Critique des Égyptesques Ornements, pp. 37-38. We may also quote a small box of Egyptian faience inscribed with the oval of Ames II, the Amasis of Herodotus. It bears two griffins quite similar to those of our group, separated by a cypress. But Dr. Birch, who was the first to publish this monument, recognizes that, in spite of the cartouche, its physiognomy is more Assyrian than Egyptian. Transactions of the Royal Society of Literature, Series 2. See on this subject an ingenious and learned paper to which we shall more than once have occasion to refer, namely, M. Clermont-Ganneau's Étude d'archéologie orientale, à l'imagerie phénicienne et la mythologie iconologique chez les Grecs. First part, La Coupe Phénicienne de Palestina, 1880, 8 vo, 8 plates. Layered, Monuments, Second Series, Plate 66. Houghton, on the Mammalia of Assyrian Sculptures. Layered, Monuments, Second Series, Plate 67. Layered, Monuments, Second Series, Plate 62, b. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1, Chapter 7, Layered, Nineveh, Volume 2. Pages 338 to 348. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, and, Volume 1, pages 408 to 410. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Plate 159. In this plate the chief types of weapons figured in the reliefs at Khorsabad are brought together. Boscawen, Notes on an ancient Assyrian bronze sword bearing a cuneiform inscription, in the Transactions of the Society of Biblical Archaeology, Volume 4. With one plate. Bada, Monument de Nineveh, Plate 160. Sayce, The Cuneiform Inscriptions of Van, in the Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 14. Mr. Pinches tells me that there is a similar text on the hollow border of the shield reproduced in our figure 225. Nothing is now to be distinguished, however, but characters that may be read, Great King, King of. See Volume 1, page 394. We cannot too often thank the keepers of the Oriental Antiquities in the British Museum for the trouble they took in enabling us to give a figure of this hitherto unpublished monument. The fragments, which had not yet been pieced together or exhibited in the galleries, were arranged expressly for our draftsmen. Numbers 385 to 391 in de Longperrier's catalogue. These objects came from the collection of Chaldaea, which was formed in Egypt but contained many things of Syrian origin. De Longperrier did not hesitate, on the evidence of their style, to class these objects as Assyrian, and anyone who examines the motives of their decoration will be of his opinion. See his Oeuvre, Volume 1. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. pp. 394 to 395, and figures 257 and 329, 331. De Longperrier, Notice de Antiquités Assyriennes du Musée du Louvre, 3rd edition, number 212. Many more varieties of the same type will be found in the plate on which Bada reproduced the principal jewels figured in the Khorsabad reliefs, Monument de Nineveh, Plate 161. See also Layered, Discoveries. The Arab jewelers still make use of similar molds, Layered, Discoveries. Layered, Discoveries, pages 177 to 178. Layered, Discoveries. The oldest mention of the pearl fisheries of the Persian Gulf is to be found in those fragments of Nearchus that have been preserved in the pages of Arrian, Indica, 38. 7. But it is probable that the search for pearl oysters began in those waters many centuries before. The Assyrians, as we have seen, made use both of pearl and mother of pearl. J. Oppert, Lambert John chez les Assyrians, in the Recueil de Travaux relatifs à la philologie et à l'archéologie égyptienne et assyrienne, Volume 2, pages 34-8 seek. M. Oppert's rendering of the paraphrase which he believes to specify amber is not accepted by all Assyriologists. In the inventory, compiled with so much care by de Longperrier, of all the little objects in the Assyrian collection of the Louvre, and especially of those necklaces found by Bata in the sand under the Great Threshold at Khorsabad, from No. 295 to number 380, there is not the slightest mention of amber. Birch and Pinches tell me that the Oriental department of their museum contains no trace of amber, with the exception of a few beads brought from Egypt, to which they have no means of assigning a date. They have never heard that any of the Mesopotamian excavations have brought the smallest vestige of this substance to light. Arrian, Expedition d'Alexander, 6. 29. The reputation enjoyed by Chaldean textiles all over Western Asia is shown by a curious text in the Book of Joshua, 7. 21. After the taking of Jericho, Achan, one of the Israelites, disobeyed orders and secreted a part of the spoil, consisting of 200 shekels of silver, a wedge of gold, and a goodly Babylonish garment. Pictas vests apud homrum fuis, accipio, unde triumphos nadi. Acu Assyria id friges invenerant, idioque frigionii appellati sunt. Orum in texera in idem Asia invenit Attalus rex, unde nomen Atalasis. Colores diversos picturi in texera Babylon maxime celebravit et nomen imposut. Pliny, Nat. History 8. Section 74. Acu pingir, and for short, pingir, here meant to embroider. Picta or picturata vestis was a robe covered with embroideries. See Pliny, L. C. Lucretius, 4. 1026, Plautus, Sticus, Act 2, Scene 2, v. 54. Silius Italicus, 14. 658, Martial, Epicur. 14, 150. I borrow these citations from the first chapter of M. Eugene Munt's Histoire de la Tapisserie in the Bibliothèque de l'Enseignement des Beaux-Arts. See Volume 1, pages 305 to 307. Nahum 3. 16. Ezekiel 17. 4. Isaiah also alludes to the commerce of Babylon, 47. 15. See on this subject, François Lenormant's La Monnaie dans l'Antiquité, Volume 1, Prolegomens, Cap. 3, and especially pages 113 to 122. Rawlinson, The Five Great Monarchies, Volume 1. Menant, Essay sur les Pierres Graves. The Chaldeans whose cry is in the ships, Isaiah 43. 14. Taylor, Notes on the Ruins of Mugair, Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, Volume 15. Strabo speaks of a Chaldean settlement on the Arabian coast of the Persian Gulf. He calls it Gera, 16. 3. All the products of Arabia, he says, were there brought together. Thence they were transported to Chaldea by sea, and carried up the Euphrates as far as Thapsacus. The juxtaposition on the black obelisk of Shalmaneser II. Of the rhinoceros, the small-eared or Indian elephant, and the Bactrian camel seems to point to this route. The monkeys in the same reliefs appear to belong to an Indian species, Hotan, Mammalia of the Assyrian sculptures, pages 319, 320. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Figures 257, 330 and 331. Art in Ancient Egypt, Volume 2. Pages 176 to 179. Soury, Theories Naturalistes du Monde et de la Vie dans l'Antiquité, Cap. I and 2. Ibid, Cap. 3. Father Lenormant, Manuel d'Histoire Ancienne, Volume 2. Page 176. Soury, Theories Naturalists. A. De Condal, Origine de Plantes Cultives, pages 285, Seek. Transcriber's Notes. 1. Obvious printers, punctuation and spelling errors have been corrected silently. 2. Some hyphenated and non-hyphenated versions of the same words have been retained as in the original. 3. Where hyphenation is in doubt, it has been retained as in the original.